no more ado, I'd like to invite Windsor from Juniper to come up and give his views of the development of the mPOS market. Windsor.
Thanks, Jeff. Asking questions the old-fashioned way, I like it. Yeah, I'm Dr. Windsor Holden. I'm the head of forecasting and consultancy at Juniper Research. For those of you who don't know us or haven't dealt with us previously, we're an analyst house focusing to a large extent on the fintech and payment space, and we've been around now for nearly 20 years. Now, where are we at today? Well, it's fairly straightforward, really. Cash is no longer king. In most markets, cash accounts for a minority of spend in store. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that in the US, it's now down to just 12% of spend in store, less than 20% in France and UK, and even in Germany, which has traditionally been a very cash-dependent market, we're down to less than 50% now. But what's also interesting now is the proportion of people that actually don't carry cash at all. So in the US, you've got 25% never or very rarely carry cash, and there is a great irony in that 20% in the UK that never carry cash. They actually do carry one piece of cash, and that is the pound coin that enables them to put in the trolley to then go and buy goods without using cash. So, yeah. But what's really interesting is the amount of people who have been unable to pay for goods or services because they didn't have any cash on them. There's still a large number of small merchants, stalls, across a wide range of markets that do not offer any kind of non-cash facilities, as our head of research found out the other day when he wanted to go and buy some pretzels after a few beers, and he couldn't because he didn't carry cash. And he obviously is not alone. We've got 44% of UK adults unable to pay for goods or services. But there is an increasing expectation amongst people now that really all retailers should offer something other than cash. But the sad fact of the matter is that there is still a significant minority, and particularly amongst the smaller merchants, the smaller stores, that are still cash dependent. But it is changing, thank goodness. So one of the reasons for this transition away from cash is, if you look on the left-hand side there, vast majority of people now own payment cards. If you look at the adults over 15, well over 90% in many European and North American markets. And what's also quite interesting, if you look down there at the bottom, at the right-hand side of that graph, India, 33%, just 5 years ago, that was just 8%. So a huge leap there in card ownership in India. The same is true of Russia, and to a slightly lesser extent in Brazil. So card ownership is clearly becoming, if not ubiquitous, even in developing markets, then it's increasing significantly. And on the right-hand side here, what I've done is I've put a chart showing the growth of mPOS accessories next to POS terminals. And what I mean by an mPOS accessory, really, is a piece of hardware that can facilitate payment via a mobile device, whether that's a smartphone or a tablet. And you can see there, as a proportion of the installed base, a significant increase in just the past 5 years already in mPOS accessories. So if we look at this chart again, this is the installed base and how that's grown over the past 5 years or so. So really it's increased from just over 7 million 5 years ago to 26 million last year, and significant growth is expected again in the next few years, and I'll come on to that later in the presentation. But you can see where the main growth has been at present, and it's been, well, roughly a third of that has happened in the US and Canada, and a significant proportion as well in West Europe. But we're also seeing huge adoption in a number of Asian countries, most notably China, which has been traditionally underserved at point of sale. And what you're seeing in China is, over the past few years, huge growth in the number of people owning cards. The number of POS terminals is increasing, but not by enough to meet demand, and so the mPOS accessories are making up the balance. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I wish I could carry off a shirt like that guy. But what I'm doing here really is to demonstrate the number of different use cases that mPOS accessories are enabling. It's not just traditional retail. A large number of mPOS terminals are now bringing non-cash payments to environments where previously you couldn't use them. And one of these is the music festival. Now, a couple of years ago, I was at this music festival, and I had the pleasure of buying that shirt with the merchant was using an mPOS accessory on their smartphone. And this is a noticeable trend because I've been to this music festival now every year for the past 5 years or so. The first couple of years, everything was cash. But what you're noticing now, they started to see 2 or 3 merchants one year, then 4 or 5. And last year, it was very nearly, as I said, about 3/4 of the merchants selling the goods and services were using the mPOS accessories. Sadly, not all of the bars were taking them, so the cash I had with me, I used on the beer. But you've also got taxis, mobile businesses, plumbers. A lot of tradesmen are increasingly using mPOS accessories. So you're really seeing a huge surge in use cases across a wide range of verticals. So really everyone is benefiting from this. First of all, as a consumer, I don't need to carry cash in as many places as I used to, or I don't need to carry as much cash. So previously, I'd go to the music festival, you'd have to load up on cash at the start. And now it's just, I'll take a bit of beer money and all's well and good. But it's really important as well for a small business, because they are highly dependent on the cash flow to remain in operation. So if you can facilitate means by which they get paid much quicker, then clearly they too will benefit. And just if you look at the bottom left of that slide, we've got 250 million micro merchants worldwide. That's businesses with 10 or less employees. And a lot of these could be crying out for payments using mPOS accessories. Now, what's likely to be driving growth? Well, I've mentioned these different number of potential use cases, and we see really shipments increasing from around 14 million last year, more than doubling within the next 5 years. So you've got an installed base, meanwhile, that's expected to exceed 50 million of these accessories in use within 5 years. Now, in terms of the players in the ecosystem, what's particularly interesting about the PayPal side of that, their acquisition of iZettle, is yes, we've got a certain amount of consolidation going on in the business, and I think there'll be more as time goes on. But really what PayPal is trying to do is create this kind of seamless offline and online experience. It's got its fingers in so many pies. And for a consumer perspective, the more you associate a brand in the online and the offline space, the more likely you are to use that brand as your de facto, your go-to means of payment. Now, what I would say in terms of mPOS really is that the newer players have a certain window of opportunity to really stake their claim in the space. And already you've clearly seen the traditional POS providers coming in, the Ingenicos, the Veriphones, the PACs, and they've gained traction in selected market. PACs, again, has done very, very well in South America. But you're also like to see more and more of what I would call the big hitters in the e-commerce space coming into the POS market, and into the mPOS market, again, so that they too can become a ubiquitous brand, a ubiquitous name in that space as well. Now, what I'd like to look at before I close, really, is what's been going on elsewhere in the world and what are the other potential disruptors to mPOS. And what's been interesting in the Chinese market, again, is what's been going on with QR codes, where you don't even need an accessory to facilitate the transaction, to the point where you're seeing absolutely staggering levels of QR code payment. It now accounts for more than a third of in-store Chinese transactions. It's very roughly about the same, or very similar, rather, transaction volumes and values to card payments, and it's completely eclipsed cash. If you go down into the markets in China, if you go out into the sticks, into rural areas, you'll find merchants by the side of the road taking payments in QR codes. You've got cashless campuses in China where the de facto payment mechanism is QR code. Last year in China alone, these were worth $1.8 trillion. Now, what's interesting is that in itself, the payments in China, just in QR codes, were worth something like 8% of all global in-store transactions. And I suppose the danger here is of disruption again to the mPOS space when you have an ecosystem that doesn't necessarily need an accessory. And already you have a number of players exploring the opportunities from QR codes outside China, particularly in developing markets such as India, where again, you're underserved by both POS and mPOS. You bring the QR code payment mechanisms in, and it's very cheap, it's very convenient. What I would say, though, is that QR codes, in turn, have security issues. They're very prone to susceptible to having viruses implanted in the codes, and some of those issues have yet to be resolved. But it is nonetheless something that the mPOS ecosystem needs to look at. So I'd basically like to close by saying that there is a massive, massive opportunity for mPOS across a whole range of verticals, but that nevertheless you shouldn't take it for granted that other technologies will not come up and bite you in the intervening period. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to the next panelist. Thank you.